Welcome to the next step of my sew along. Today we're going to be working with the border that goes around in this section here. So this is actually, you can do this one of two ways. You can either hand piece it, like traditionally hand piece it, or you can sew it on the sewing machine. The templates will work for both techniques either way. You can do part of it on the machine, you can do part of it by hand. It's really up to you. So if you start sewing it by hand and you get fed up with doing that, then just sew the rest of it by the sewing machine. So what we have is we have a couple of templates, your acrylic templates. So you're going to cut your pieces out using your acrylic templates. So you've got to remember that, and I have this finished piece here, you've got to remember that these sit like this on point, and this edge actually here is on the outside, so it runs along the outside edge of your strip. So these need to be cut on the straight of grain, these ones here, okay? The square doesn't matter because it's going to be surrounded, but generally you will probably cut that with your straight of grain going down the four sides. But these ones here, this little piece here, the longest part of this template needs to be cut on the straight of grain. Regardless of whether you're machine piecing or whether you're hand piecing these shapes together, you need to use your template to cut your pieces out. So pop it onto your fabric down, you can cut it out in layers, pop it onto your mat, and then you can just cut around the outside of your template. And there you have it. So you have your squares there. So again, if you're machine piecing, you would sew them on the machine, and I'm going to run you through that in a moment, but I'm going to show you firstly how I hand piece. So I'm going to take my little piece of fabric here, my little square, and I'm going to put my template back on, and you'll notice that on your template you have these little holes in the corners, and that's for when we're doing traditional piecing. So we're going to mark our little spots there on our fabric. So I'm just going to find my pen over here. So I'm going to just mark those dots. So I'm just going to, with my pen, mark a spot there. Then I'm just going to take my template and I'm going to join those dots up with a line. And that's going to be my stitching line. So when you're piecing, it's really important that you are very precise and you're very accurate, because if you're just out a millimetre on each of your seams, you could end up being out inches and inches at the other end, and that's not going to work because you need it all to fit together. So you need to be very precise in what you're doing. So make sure when you're drawing your lines that you match the dots up and you draw through to the other one. So there we have it's drawn onto the wrong side, and that's our stitching line. So you do that with all of your pieces, so whether it's all your squares and then your triangles. Okay, so then we're going to sew these together. Okay, so make sure you lay your pieces out in the way that you want to sew them together, because sometimes if you pick them up, you'll sew the wrong side to the wrong side. So basically what I'm going to do is pick up the square and one of your triangles, and I'm just going to put right sides together. And then I'm going to take a nice fine pin, make sure it's nice and fine, not a great big crowbar pin. And you're going to put your pin into the corner of that your little triangle in the cream, and then you're going to come out into the very point of the square, and then line your pieces up and pin that corner. And then I come up to the other corner and I'm going to come into the point right at the corner where my dot was. I'm going to come out at the point on the red square where my dot was. And I'm going to take a tiny little stitch there. Now I'm working with a cotton thread, and I'm going to leave it tail right there. And I'm going to go in for a back stitch. So I'm going to go back into where I started and come back out. When I come back out, I'm just going to wrap my thread, 2 wraps around my needle, pull it back in tight, and that will give me a little knot at the beginning. I prefer not to do a knot in the end of my thread, because when I come back in to sew it, it always gets caught in the end of my needle and you're trying to drag a needle through with a knot on the end of it. Then I'm going to do just a simple running stitch. Now the key to this hand piecing is to keep your running stitch sitting on just outside of your drawn line, and that gives you enough allowance for when you iron it open. So I'm just going to load my needle up with about 5 stitches, nice neat little running stitches, and you've got to check on the back to make sure you've got it in the right place so that you're sewing in exactly the same place on the other side. Pull it through, and then I'm going to do a little back stitch. So then I'm going to come back up and I'm going to load my needle with about another 5 stitches. Make sure you check on the back to make sure that you're stitching in the same place on the back. So about 5 more stitches, come up, and then I'll do another little back stitch, and that just locks everything in place and it stops it from gathering up. And then come back up, make sure you're in place at the back, and you're sitting just outside the drawn line, so it's on the outside of the drawn line, not on the inside. And I'm going to take my little needle out, my pin out, come up into that point. Then I'm going to do a back stitch right up to the point. I do 2 wraps around my needle, pull it through, and it locks it off. And then there you have it. Nice, neat. And then you can just finger press that out. You don't need to rush to the iron and press it out, just finger press that out. And then of course you will then get your other piece and sew it on to the bottom side of that. And so we end up with this. So when we put these together, they will look like that. So you're going to take your 2 pieces that you need to sew together, put them right sides together, pop them under your machine, and don't you just love this faff? It has this automatic little foot thing, which I love to bits. And just sew your seam allowance with your 1/4 inch foot, and then press your scissors. Oh, I love this machine. Okay, so we have this one on here like this. We're going to take the other one and make sure that it's going to be in the right place. So it needs to be opposite like this. Put the right sides together and just disregard the lines on the back, because you don't need to do that when you're machine piecing. Pop it in under your machine, and we're just going to sew with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Love it. Okay, and then we have this nice neat little seams here. So then you would press these out. I would press these as I go. So I would sew a whole bunch of these together, and then I would press my seams out or in, whichever way you need them to be. Okay. So regardless of whether you're sewing it by hand or whether you're sewing it on the machine, you will still piece it together in a strip like that, and you can refer to your pattern to see how many pieces you need, because you'll need 2 strips. You'll need 4 strips altogether, and you will need to have 2 of a certain number and then 2 of a couple more in the strip, but you need to refer to your pattern for that. So I'll be back next time with our next sew along with the next installment. So I hope you're enjoying yourself, and send us your pictures in and let us have a look at them, and we'll share them on Facebook and Instagram.